Can you kind of describe what hormonal or endocrine disruptors are?
Yeah. So basically, as I was talking about a little bit earlier, the human body, and I talk about evolution, anthropology a lot. So forgive me if there are people listening who, I don't mean to offend anyone's religion or origins, but I always start with, look, we've been here a long time, humans. And in that period of time, which I will, say is around 4 million years, we've come a long way in terms of having clean air, clean water. Our food was much more nutrient rich because we picked it out of the ground. We chased after chickens. Like we really were moving more, sweating more vitamin D on our skin. Quality of everything was better, right? Fast forward now to modern day times. We all live in it. But we really are looking at a lot of things that work against all the things that made human beings function properly. And so when it comes to these chemicals, which actually in our country and pretty much around the world, but I can speak to the history here, we had such a boom of chemical production after World War II. In the 1940s, it was when Monsanto and lots of companies really started making pesticides, naugahyde, rayon, plexiglass for fighter pilots so that they could fly with lighter aircraft. We had food storage capability that would reduce use of natural resources. We had plates that would not break if you dropped them. So it was great for housewives in the 1950s, right? So we've had a lot of chemicals come into our market, come into our products just in a very recent time. And that's a lot of change for the human body to manage in terms of just kind of foreign invaders making their way in. So back to your question, hormones have been part of the human existence. It's very ancient. Even estrogen and androgens have been around since humans have ever been around. And they work at such small doses to do huge things in the human body because everything about evolution is about conserving energy so that you can evolve to the next generation. And so when it comes to energy, hormones really are the most powerful thing you can have to do anything in the human body. And we have lots of them. We have insulin for sugar management. We have thyroid hormone to manage metabolism. We have fertility hormones. We have growth and development. We have brain development hormones. And we have hormones that affect our development of our male and female genitalia, and also hormones that affect our risk for hormone sensitive cancers like breast cancer, testicular, prostate, those kind of things, thyroid. So the idea that these chemicals were discovered to disrupt, and disrupt is a broad word, which was left open for all of the research that would follow from 25 years ago when they coined this, but it has a lot to do with upregulating receptors, downregulating receptors, intervening with physiologic pathways and communication, which is how, hormones affect glands and organs. So that's really a lot of where endocrine disrupting chemicals, EDCs, was coined. Immune disruption chemicals, which I coined because I'd never seen it in the literature, is reframing a lot of the data that was already collected on many of the immune effects, but framing it towards, what we're seeing epidemiologically in terms of, these diseases developing. And so we see things like cytokine increase in inflammatory responses. We see even with the perfluoroalkyls, which are the forever chemicals, like nonstick chemicals, stain guard chemicals, that they decrease the body's ability to make antibodies when you get vaccinated. So there's lots of different effects that can come about, but it's reframing the immune system and the endocrine system in terms of how these chemicals basically disrupt normal physiology, normal function. And by the way, these systems talk to each other. So, it's not to say that the endocrine system is a soloed, siloed system. They all talk to each other. You have all these systems communicating, so anywhere these chemicals intervene can potentially cause a cascade of events. So that was really the framing of the book.
Yeah. Do you think the kind of long-term implications, there's some really big impacts to our health that's still yet to be discovered? Because a few decades time we might look back and be like, oh wow, there's a lot more health implications than we realized. Maybe similar with like tobacco and cigarettes, it took a few decades to really know the true extent to
Yeah.
the implications. Do you think that's going to happen with
Yeah,
toxics?
I would say that third-party testing, academic testing, NIH-funded testing, unfortunately, we're having a real problem with science being cut off at this time, in terms of some of the most important cancer prevention studies, environmental chemical exposure studies. And we're also having, a bit of rollback when it comes to oversight with exposures in manufacturing. So when you combine those issues where you have less science and less investigation and more, less regulation overall in manufacturing, it really can potentially be a problem. Um, so I'm hopeful that we're still going to be able to come up with this data and that there's going to be funding for it. But I will say this, and I get asked this a lot, especially now with the politics in the US, right? Really, really contentious on every level, right? But when it comes to regulation, I always encourage it. I always want red dye number 3 to be taken off the market if the science supports it. I always want certain chemicals in the water system to be, you know, mandated, managed, remediated. But here's the thing, it will not be able to do, we can't get enough regulation to manage the problem. In other words, the horse left the stable, you know? We have to do this for ourselves in a very reasonable way, nothing to get scared about, but do it in a way that you're providing agency over your own body and your own choices and not waiting to be saved, you know?